Hello, and we are back for another series with Women's History Month, hashtag Choose the Challenge with Dr. Tamara Patzer. I'm Luana Bradford, visionary and co-founder of Celebrate You, Women Embracing Wellness. Tamara, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for agreeing. This is going to be a good conversation. So before we dig into hashtag Choose the Challenge, tell us a little bit about who is Dr. Tamara Patzer and what's going on in your world.
Well, what's going on in my life is the doctor is new. I just earned my PhD, I think it was in November of 2020. And the year before that, I actually earned my reverend credential after about 10 years of being a licentiate minister at my little church. They finally said, "Oh, it's time." So I actually earned Reverend and Doctor in the same year, and it was 2020. And it's interesting because that part of my life, I don't talk a lot about the spiritual side of me because in my business life, I am what I would call a hybrid marketer, publisher, coach, person, mentor when it comes to marketing and books. And my big message that I did receive in a spiritual way that came through loud and clear to me one day in an audible was, "You are the messenger's messenger." And I take that to mean that my job is to help other people be found, seen, and heard. So I'm the messenger's messenger.
That's beautiful. I love that. So, Miss Messenger of the Messenger, what does Women's History Month mean to you? And why do you think it's so important that we recognize and celebrate the shoulders on which we stand, but also celebrating women around us every single day?
It's interesting when I think of women, it takes me right back to when I was a teenager. And I had this substitute teacher, this woman who just, she was probably in my life for what, a day. And she said to me, she says, "Tammy, you're very discerning." I had no idea what the word discerning meant. So I looked it up and it made me feel good because, of course, it means that you're thoughtful and think about things and that you're able to think for yourself. So I think about that time. I was 16 or 17 years old, and I was told, "You can be whoever you want to be. You can become whoever you want to be." So, and I believed it. I absolutely believed that I could go out and become anything, but I didn't know that women were not television anchors at that time. I didn't know that women couldn't just go anywhere, to the college of their choice and become an engineer or a scientist, or that a newspaper editor, which I did become, that in the newsroom, that typically women were only allowed to do community news and not hard news. So it's important that we look at women's history because I'm talking about, that's only what, 40 years ago, when all this was happening and I was living this. And then as I got older, I did go to college, and I kept hitting that wall. I kept hitting that glass ceiling when it came to wages, when it came to promotion. So of course, in my mind, it was, "Oh, I need more education." So I'm one of those millions of people who obviously now got up to the PhD level, thought that education was going to save me because I was always making like at least $10,000 less than the men in the same job at the newspaper. And I look at all of the women, you know, in news, for example, you can look at Barbara Walters, you can look at many there's many women, Gail Sierens, who is actually a Tampa native, where I live now. I live in Florida. She actually was, I believe, the first sports announcer, female sports announcer, who was allowed to go into the locker room. You
I
know,
remember.
there's all of these things. So it's so important to look at the history of women. And, you know, if you then you find out about the women, the suffragettes. You learn about, you know, the Pocahontas, Sacagawea. I mean, if you look at women in history and go backwards, you find out that there have been many, many women who are literally erased, you know, and they brought some of that history out, like the women from NASA who were the mathematical geniuses. And even when I was young and I got a divorce, I didn't know that all my work, when I was paying all those bills and working on the credit, guess who got all the credit that I created when I was married? It wasn't me. It was my ex-husband. And I didn't know that women didn't have any of these rights of just simple things like having credit in your own name, or you know, the higher education. What I found out about my higher education is, yes, it did enable me to move up, but I never got higher than mid-range in the local newspaper, even though by that time I had a master's degree, you know, and the men in the same positions may have had a bachelor's degree or no degree at all. But I just find that women have worked so hard, and so it's so important to, like, just like your hashtag, choose to challenge everything that's happening. We're still waiting for the Equal Rights Amendment, and now we're fighting to make it so that we can all keep voting. You know, if some people would like it if women didn't vote, if brown people didn't vote, if black people didn't vote, you know, Native Americans, you know, Asians, they'd all be happy if only a small majority of white people got to vote and women could be erased. You know, we're half of the population.
You
So
know, we just missed something about where we stand. Hearing a little feedback.
Oh, you muted yourself.
There, yeah. I think it's so important that we. Can you hear back, Pete?
A little bit now. Okay, try that.
Okay. I think it's so important, as you said, that we understand our history. And then in doing so, that's where we can make the change. But if we, like you just mentioned, so many, my passion is with women taking control of their financial well-being. And you just said something that's just, it's something I forgot about, but it's so true. Women were not able to get credit in their name. They couldn't buy a home independently. Yet it's something we as women don't even talk about now comfortably among ourselves. What do you think about that?
Well, I lived it. So again, because money has been, it's like a taboo topic. And if you look at our educational system, I remember I had a class in high school where it was something that was similar to what today might be called life skills. Mm-hmm. And I think we learned how to balance our checkbook and how to make a budget, but that was about it. And we, you know, I remember getting that first paycheck. You know, I worked at the Dairy Queen and they took taxes out And I didn't understand what all those things were that were subtracted out of the check. My little piddly $16 check, ended up being like 11 or something. And I didn't understand that. But I think that financial literacy is vital. And it's interesting because I actually helped one of my clients. She wrote a book called The Less You Know, the More They Make. And her name is Chris Quintana. And what that means is the less educated you are about money and finances, the more the banks make, the more everybody else makes, the more taxes you pay because of that. And women are in a situation, even today, where let's say they have been married a long time and their spouse took care of all the finances and they find themselves widowed or divorced and they don't know how to pay bills. Right. That still exists in 2021, that people are financially illiterate, and we don't like to talk about money because, again, if you go backwards, many of us grew up where, it's don't air your dirty laundry. That was what my mother used to tell me. You don't talk about politics. You don't talk about money. You don't talk about bills or problems, personal things. So, if you're taught that from a young age, you're not going to share that. But money is so important, especially today, because we have the opportunity to make a lot more money than we've ever had. But if we're afraid of it or we're not willing to understand to be financially educated, we might just stick it in the bank and make 0.0000% interest or no interest at all because we're afraid to trust somebody to ask them, how do I use money? So money is a huge issue, and the more I learn, the more I want to be an advocate for financial literacy, because I'm finding when I talk to people who know about money and how to make money grow, I find that I get all kinds of anxiety because it's like, can I trust that this money can grow? Because that has not been my experience, because I was a single mom. I had 3 children. I got married early, divorced early, and then had 2 more children and didn't even marry that person because I knew it would be a mistake. And so I ended up being a single mom for all of my adult life except for 4 years. So
let me ask you this. So that's a real good point. I mean, we make choices and life happens. But now that you're in the point in your life where you have a greater sense of awareness and you are educating yourself more on finances, looking at the hashtag choose to challenge, what would you say to our listening audience today about taking control of their financial destiny?
I think if you think about choose to challenge, so choose to challenge those old fear-based ideas about money and challenge it. Challenge yourself to become literate, financially literate, to do the research, to talk to people who know about money, because many of us are a little bit afraid of, let's call it math. We're math challenged. Even though today with the internet, and I discovered if you know what you're trying to figure out, you can go find a calculator somewhere online that will help you. Like, for example, if you're trying to understand the rule of 72, which is basically how long does it take for your money to double? And you can go find a calculator and figure that out based on whatever if it's annual percentage or quarterly or monthly or whatever. That's something I've recently discovered. Cryptocurrency is another one. Don't be afraid to look into new currencies and new technology, or to educate yourself on stocks, or find out what your risk tolerance is, meaning, are you somebody that you're very conservative with your money and you don't want to risk anything, or are you somebody that it's kind of like, yeah, let's let it roll? You have to, these are things that all of us need to learn and educate ourselves about. So if I were to put a challenge, choose to challenge, it would be challenge your fears that you have about money.
I love that. That's a very powerful statement. And we know that when we control of our future current state, we then control what the future state will look like. And we're impacting the lives of our children, and it just ripples, right?
Yes.
In generations. So let's talk about the generational impact, because you mentioned earlier about the suffragette movement. And 1920, women in the U.S. received the right to vote. We're now in the 101st year, and the National Association of Women wanted to continue the celebration, the centennial celebration, into 2021. When you think about that, and you think about all the ethnic groups that actually rallied around this whole movement to get us to where we are today, what does it mean to you as far as our vote representing our voice?
What 2020, well, actually the last 4 years really taught me was how much our individual voices and votes matter more than ever. To tell you the truth, I'm pretty sure I missed a couple of elections over the years, but something really did strike me in 2016 and 2020 that I needed to make sure that I got out to vote. And I also recognized many of my friends and colleagues, not only did they realize how important their individual voice was, they were out there helping people, like old people who needed help to get to the polls or to vote. They would make sure, they would drive them there if that's what they needed. So, and then I had friends who were out, doing the marches and helping to register people to vote. And I really recognized that it's a serious thing, way more serious than I ever imagined, that there are people who are trying to literally destroy democracy, the way our system works. And I never had that fear before until the last 4 years. I really recognized that, oh my goodness, we could lose this. So it's really important that, it can't just be an election year thing. It has to be that we're recognizing that people need to understand that voting, at the local level is very important. And then, of course, it goes up from there, and we all really witnessed how important, for example, when Georgia had the runoffs, that those two senators made if they had not won, it would be a very different system happening right now. And so what I've really discovered is how important it is to keep talking about it, and for more and more people to register to vote, to keep voting, and to fight against any type of voter suppression. And it just shocks me. I mean, I shouldn't be that naive, but I guess I am. That, you look at women, you said it's 101 years, and women's right to vote. And if you look at Native Americans, fought hard to vote. Civil Rights Act, all of this, people have given their lives for us to have this simple, what we take for granted. We go and we say, yeah, I want that guy or that person, in this role. And so it's even more important. And it's very interesting to me that I actually have, I was going to do a podcast called Vote. And I actually bought the domain. I own Vote Radio, and I didn't do anything with it. And now I'm thinking to myself, well, there was a reason why you did that. And so I'm thinking, well, now would be a perfect time to start that, because it would be talking about voting, and different people could talk about all these different things. So I always find it interesting when I know that at some point in time I had an inkling about how important it was, because I made that effort to go literally start working on a podcast called Vote. So I'm thinking I really need to actually act on that inspiration.
Yeah. It's interesting how we'll get premonitions, and you said you went ahead and you reserved that name, and maybe now is the time for that type of platform and message. So I want to go into the personal side for a minute. As a woman, you've been influenced by someone who you've known personally in your life, someone whose voice still rings in your head, whose shapes and guides you. Who is that woman? And tell us a little bit about her.
It's funny because I thought a lot about this, and again, it may be cliche, but it really was my mother. My mother was an author. She wrote, fiction novels. She used to write songs. She used to read every morning before we'd go to school. She would read to us right before we went to school, and she was a big influence in me. And of course, she was one of the voices telling me, you can do whatever you want to do. Don't be afraid to raise your hand. She encouraged me when I was in school. I joined a club called American Field Service, which AFS it's still around. It's a group where they send kids to different countries to experience different cultures, and they bring students in from all over to experience, we had somebody from Brazil and Germany and Austria and Japan come to our high school for a year. Well, I ended up going to Thailand in 1975 for 3 months. And I laugh at that because 1975, May of 75 was when Saigon fell. And it was not really a good time to go to Southeast Asia, but I went. But my mom always encouraged me to, if I wanted something, to work for it, to try to get it. But more than that, my mom also was a nice person. It's like, her thing was, if you can't say something nice, don't say something at all. And even though that kind of, again, it's one of those cliches, but really the message was, be kind to everyone, treat people the way you want to be treated. That was another thing that she always said, treat people the way you want to be treated. And I remember I was going through some stage, and I'd say, I don't have any friends, woe's me. I was 15, and I had lots of friends, but I certainly was in the dumps. And my mom basically said, well, if you wanted to have friends, you have to be a friend. So she was always full of these, great sayings, but it all made sense. But So even my mom passed away in 1985. And so even to this day, she's there in the back of my head, you know, whenever I come up against something that I'm not sure, you know, I can hear maybe some advice that she gave me. And people, it was kind of funny when I was growing up, everybody wanted to come to my house and spend the night. And I'm like, you know, I'd have friends over and I'd get tired of having them over and they'd go, "Oh, Mrs. Weiss, can I spend the night?" And I'd be in the back and I'd be going like this. No, no. And my mom she'd say something like, "Oh, well, we would love to have you, but I'm sure your mom would rather that you come home, you know, come home for the night." Because everybody wanted to be at my house because it just had a pleasant, easy going vibe, you know, because it wasn't too clean, but it wasn't dirty. It was just a home, and it was just a pleasant place to be. So I was very lucky in that sense that I had that experience and that I had a mom who was very creative and supportive. You know, if I wanted to do art, she would give me art supplies. If I wanted to write, you know, I had my paper and my pens. You know, this was back before computers. So that's who I think has been a huge influence on me. And I still think that that's how, you know, treat other people the way you want to be treated is probably something that it becomes part of who you are. And then, of course, that also makes you a champion for people who are being mistreated. And I was always the one, if somebody was, I had this little short friend, Melinda, and she was like 5 foot and I'm 5'8". And she would go pick fights with people. And I'd be there, and this girl, she literally would say to them, blah, 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 blah. "If you don't do that, Tammy's going to beat you up." And I'd be standing there. I mean, I literally was like going, "What?" Because, of course, that wasn't, you know, but I looked intimidating, you know, I could just stand there and cross my arms and look very intimidating, like I might be able to do something. But she used to do that all the time. But it's interesting how just talking about it kind of brings back those memories of being that champion. I mean, I used to go trick or treating for UNICEF, and I collected clothes for the earthquake victims in Nicaragua. I guess there was an earthquake in Nicaragua, and
When you just said trick or treating for UNICEF, I remember that.
yeah, and
Tammy, we're actually almost out of time, so I want you to leave our listening audience with a word, a golden nugget that you'd like them to take away, but also how can they get in touch with you?
okay, so first I'll just say how they can get in touch with me. The easiest way is just go to Facebook, look up Tamara Patzer, and say hi. And I, you know, say, "Hey, I heard you on with Lawana," and talk to me. I think my advice, if it was one word, and I guess that word would be authenticity. And the reason I think authenticity is a good word for everybody to live by is because if you're you and you're real, it's people are going to know it, and you're going to attract people as friends and in business. So authenticity.
Wonderful.
And take that challenge. Let go of that financial fear.
Definitely the challenge. This has been a wonderful time. I am sorry it was so short, but thank you so much for being a part of this, Tammy. Ladies, And to our listening audience, you have been here listening to Women's History Month, hashtag Choose the Challenge with Dr. Tamara Patzer. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Women's History Month, hashtag Choose the Challenge. And as we always say and celebrate you, love yourself, embrace yourself, and whatever you do, celebrate you. Till next time.